Caleb, are we all set? Okay, I'm going to call to order this March 13th, 2026 special meeting of the Harwich Conservation Commission being held in the Don B. Griffin Room at Harwich Town Hall. This is not a virtual meeting. It is in person only, but is being recorded for viewing after the meeting. The agenda item is, this is a work session for the Conservation Commission development of draft coastal resiliency regulations, working with the Cape Cod Commission. Amy, will you proceed from here, please?
Sure. Thank you all for making time on your Friday for being here. So as you know, the past several months, the Conservation Commission, or Conservation Department Commission, has been working with the Pleasant Bay Alliance, the Cape Cod Commission, and the Cooperative Extension, along with the towns of Chatham and Orleans, through a SNEP grant, to hopefully adopt coastal floodplain resiliency regulations. So Harwich in particular has a floodplain bylaw that's under the zoning bylaw, but other than our very rudimentary language about land subject to coastal storm flowage in the Wetlands Protection Act as well as in the bylaw, there's no performance standards and not much guidance. So that's what we're kind of here to do. We've had a few work sessions already, and today is to kind of give an overview of that, but also maybe start delving into some of the draft recommendations that they have for you. So we have Heather McElroy and Michelle White with the Cape Cod Commission, Shannon with the Cooperative Extension, and I greatly apologize, I forget your name.
Rachel.
Hi, Rachel. I know we met the other day virtually. And Carol Ridley with the Pleasant Bay Alliance, who are going to give a little presentation and kind of walk us through these draft regulations.
Great. Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here. I'm going to start us off and walk through a presentation. Invite you to stop me along the way if you have questions, but we're certainly here to stay and answer questions. I'm Heather McElroy. I'm the Natural Resource Manager at the Cape Cod Commission, and I'm joined with members of this team that Amy has just introduced. And we're very excited to be having these conversations with towns around Pleasant Bay and others across the Cape to talk about possibly adopting regulations for floodplain development. So, you know, as background, just those are our partners, and Amy noted that this project is made possible through funding from the SNEP network, which is a program of, well, it is a project of SNEP program, which is a program of the EPA. So just as background, I guess, here's a section of Harwich and a GIS representation of areas of Harwich that are in the floodplain, both the current floodplain and a projected future floodplain as modeled by the Massachusetts Coast Flood Risk Model. I'm hoping that many of you were able to either attend the workshop that happened at the end of January, or were able to view the recording of that session, which gave sort of an overview of the big picture on this work. Happy to get into questions that you may have generally, but our purpose here today is really to talk about one aspect of the work that we've been doing in the floodplain, and that is wetlands regulations to address development in the floodplain. We anticipate this is the first of several conversations. We're here to present and take your questions, leave you with some decision points, and then you all will have discussions, and then we're happy to come back and help you along on the next steps as may be appropriate. We're not Amy's not looking or expecting any decisions being made today. This is really an introduction. So with that, this project team plus others, we had the Urban Harbors Institute and a legal team, Noble, Wickersham, and Hart, help us develop these various tools. Developed a wetlands bylaw, which is the coastal resiliency bylaw, coastal resiliency regulations, and a zoning bylaw. Zoning is the purview of the planning board, the building department, the zoning board of appeals to some extent. Conservation Commission, you administer wetlands bylaws and regulations, right? So you probably have regulations that you've adopted that pertain to other wetland resource areas. What we're talking about today yeah, there it is. It's just one component, which are the coastal resiliency regulations. They are something that you are able to adopt as a conservation commission by a vote of your commission. You'd want to have public hearing process clearly, but the regulations are not something that need to go to town meeting, whereas the bylaw is something that would need to go to town meeting, be presented and passed by, I'm not sure whether it's a 2/3 or majority vote.
I think it's 2/3, but don't quote me on that.
Yeah, but you have the authority, from what I understand, you already have the authority to regulate within wetlands, so adopting regulations are something that you could do.
So, just to clarify here, the way you're conceptualizing this is the coastal resiliency regulations would actually be part of our wetlands regulations, what you're reviewing here. But if there is a coastal resiliency bylaw, that potentially has its own set of regulations associated with that. Is that correct? Or
Sort
are
of,
you?
sort of. And it is confusing, so let me clarify a little bit. In the development of these regulations, we started with the wetlands bylaw. A bylaw which is adopted by the legislative body of a community, in this case, town meeting, authorizes the town to regulate things in a certain way. And when we initially started on this project, we wanted to be able to have towns regulate not just the current floodplain as defined by the FEMA mapping, but to consider the impacts of future flooding, which we know are already happening and are going to get worse. So the coastal resiliency bylaw would authorize the community to regulate not just the FEMA floodplain, which communities address in different ways at the present time, but a future floodplain. That's a future extent, how far flooding is going to extend into your community, and also heights, future heights. And then we developed the regulations and the zoning to complement that. All of those regulations work together. Our recommendation to you is actually and what we're here to discuss today, is adopt regulations that don't consider that future floodplain, that are only looking at the currently defined, delineated FEMA floodplain, which most people are familiar with. It's the subject of the National Flood Insurance Program. You have zoning regulations that will apply to that, et cetera. However, and I'll get into this, some of the terminology that we're introducing in these regulations will support the future adoption of the wetlands bylaw, something that you would have to take to town meeting, which would allow you to apply these regulations not just to the FEMA floodplain, but to that future floodplain as well. So the bylaw essentially would extend your jurisdiction. to additional areas within the community. And we have mapping that we can show to help you understand what those, how that would change.
I'm just going to join Heather up here. Shannon Holst with Cape Cod Cooperative Extension and Woods Oceanographic Institution Sea Grant. I said that too fast. All of you are squinting at me. Cape Cod Cooperative Extension, which is Barnstable County, and Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution Sea Grant. So the other important piece of this is that it's not a separate bylaw from your wetlands bylaw. It's built into your wetlands bylaw. And you already have jurisdiction over land subject to coastal storm flowage, which is the FEMA floodplain that Heather was just talking about. So it's working with that existing resource area and, as Heather was just saying, expanding it with that bylaw. But it's not a whole separate bylaw. It's built into your wetlands bylaw.
Thank you, yeah,
I'm just
important.
gonna stay on
Yeah,
there.
no, that's good. So, did that answer the question? Good. All right, so what we're going to get into, Amy, I know, shared the draft regulations with you. This is something that we have edited from the original version based on the input that we've already received during the workshop in January. What I'm gonna do is walk through the separate sections that are in that set of draft regulations. And I've just taken screenshots of the different pages and highlighted what I'm gonna sort of focus in on, so that, and I think you've received the presentation as well, so that as you go back, you can make connections between the document and the points that I'm trying to get at in this presentation. So, starting with a preamble, not, a super important point here, but it is important to establish in regulations, the importance of regulating this area. So we're identifying that wetlands support biodiversity, recreation, scenic beauty. They also, importantly for this purpose, serve as natural protections against flood damage due to a variety of functions that they serve. So it's important to sort of set that out in the regulations. Similarly, establishing the purpose. Why are you taking on this work? We want to protect those wetland resource areas by controlling activities that may have a significant impact on those resources. So the purpose of the regulations is, it's important to establish, for general understanding, but also in the case of an appeal, you are being clear about what you're trying to achieve. Similarly, jurisdiction here is, well, not similarly, the jurisdiction section is being clear what we're, the area, both physically and otherwise, trying to address. And I think the language that we've all been familiar with regard to the floodplain, there are various terms that are used. It can be called the floodplain, the FEMA floodplain, A zones, V zones, et cetera. Land subject to coastal storm flowage is a corollary term that the Department of Environmental Protection has in its regulations. So LSCSF is equivalent to floodplain. We're introducing yet another equivalency here, but it's important should the community decide to adopt the bylaw and regulate a future floodplain area. The term that we're introducing is the coastal resilience zone. So in this case, for this purpose today, this document that we're talking about today, it's just introducing a new term that is equivalent to land subject to coastal storm flowage or the FEMA floodplain. Then there's a definition section. I'm not going to go through all of the definitions. If you have these terms defined within your bylaw or your regulations already, you don't need to adopt them here. It may make sense to adopt them somewhere else, not necessarily here, but in any case, you want to make sure that these terms are addressed somewhere and that they are consistent, wherever you are adopting definitions. And so here, the coastal resilience zone is defined to include that land subject to coastal storm flowage, any land that is subject to inundation caused by a 1% annual chance storm. So that is that 100-year storm event that is also what the FEMA flood zone defines. And some other things that are not particularly relevant for this this purpose, but would become relevant at a future time. So the CRZ shall include at the end of that paragraph, within its boundaries, one or more of the following subareas: the velocity zone, the A zone, which includes various subareas, and I'll get into that in a minute. Okay.
Excuse me, I'm
Yes.
sorry.
Yeah, no,
I'm
no,
being
please.
interrupted.
Yes.
What about riverine areas, for tidal rivers? Do you consider those to be part of the coastal resource zone?
So tidal rivers, yes, to the extent that they are within the flood zone, yes.
But defined by the boundaries of the flood zone, not the 200-foot buffer?
Right,
I see. Okay.
exactly. It's not, this does not, there will be some overlap with the riverfront area, but this is addressing floodplain functions and not riverfront, which gets at more other kinds of buffers, the impacts to rivers, right, from overland flow and development within the floodplain, development within that buffer area.
Thank you.
Yeah. So here we have one of a couple of ways of defining elevation. This is one of the decision points that I will leave you with at the end of this discussion. To what height are we regulating structures that may be proposed within the floodplain? And there are a couple of different ways of getting at that. We'll sort of put a pin in that and come back to that later. A couple of other areas that are decision points are definitions here for substantial damage and substantial improvement. Both of these terms apply to structures that where work is proposed. In the first, the building has been damaged, and the total cost of repairs is 50% or more of the structure's assessed value. So I've highlighted assessed value. Often communities use market value to make that assessment, and we're recommending that assessed value is a more conservative and consistent term to utilize. But that is something for you to discuss as a community. Does that make sense, given your current practices, and are you comfortable using that term? And Shannon, do you want to add?
Yeah, so the way that the towns use market value is they allow the applicant to get their own appraisal. So that means folks with enough money to get their own appraisal get it, and then that means they have a bit more leniency, and so it's a little bit of an income-based inequity. So that's a way that we were trying to get at that. As we were building these, that was an issue that was brought up to us, so this is how we're trying to address it.
And if I can really quickly, that will have to be a discussion that we want to be on the same page as the building department and the zoning compliance officer in terms of how we're going to measure that. Is it going to be the assessed value or the appraised value? Because right now, as Shannon said, we suggest that people get an appraisal, and we would go with that. But if they cannot get an appraisal, then we do go by the assessed value. But we don't want the Conservation Commission to have a different regulation or definition of substantial improvement, damage, or whatnot to go by.
We encourage coordinating several pieces of this with the building
Yes.
department, yeah.
So similar consideration applies to substantial improvement. Presumptions. So this is just setting out the understanding that any project that involves filling, dredging, constructing one or more buildings or other structures within that CRZ or otherwise altering the coastal resilience zone is presumed to have a significant effect on wetland resources and their functions. You're likely familiar with presumptions from other sections of the Wetlands Act and regulations. The general performance standards sort of set out a number of expectations for how activities are regulated within the CRZ. Sort of, generalizes it, but then really these regulations rely on the specifics, regulations that apply to the different sub-zones within this floodplain area. So, have any of you seen this graphic before?
You showed.
So this, I think, is something developed by DEP or coastal zone management. Was it DEP?
FEMA and then
Oh, FEMA
coastal
first.
zone management.
Oh, okay.
Adjusted it.
Yeah. So terminology is changing a little bit in Massachusetts, and so this graphic helps us understand sort of the subzones within the floodplain. So is this, yeah. So the floodplain, what I've been calling the FEMA floodplain or land subject to coastal storm flowage is this area here. It comes up to the line between A zones and X zone. So we're not really talking about X zone at the present time. The V zone is that is most seaward, and it's where wave heights exceed 3 feet, and you have the most sort of powerful erosive effects happening during a storm event. Then landward of that, you have the A zone, which is divided into the coastal A zone and the A zone, which is even landward of that. The coastal A zone, which is also known as the moderate wave action area, or the MOA, is where wave heights are less than 3 feet and more than 1.5 feet. And then landward of that is the A zone, or the minimal wave action area, where wave heights are less than 1.5 feet. And the LIMWA is that line, that point. We don't really get into that here, but just to point it out. The point between the MOA and the MIWA, the limit of moderate wave action area. So just keep those terms in mind as we go through these next few sections.
And if I can pause on that for a minute, just so you know, the building code already regulates all of these zones, and that's already built into your zoning as well. So these are not new to the town at all, and we're just keeping it consistent with what's already happening.
So the V zone, being that sort of most hazardous area, is regulated the most strictly. So we've laid out here the activities that should not occur in this area, including no new construction or expansion of any building or other structure, including sheds, garages, pools, septic systems, or other structures. Also, no new construction or expansion of roads, parking lots, public shared use paths, or other impervious surfaces shall be permitted within the V zone. That this section does make allowance for the maintenance and repair of existing roads and parking lots, and conversion of at-grade roads to elevated roadways and bridges, etc. Some other things that are prevented here within the V zone, prohibited, would be new berms or seawalls, new septic systems, impervious patios, the storage of hazardous materials. The V zone, these regulations do make provisions to allow for repair of structures that have suffered substantial damage or where improvements are proposed. So some redevelopment is allowed for, as is some limited placement of fill, as discussed. So without going through all of the details of that, just sort of highlighting those sort of prohibited actions. This is the most restricted area, and as you discuss these regulations and what you feel comfortable with here in Harwich, you may want to edit this list in some fashion. So then, moving then landward into that next subzone of the floodplain, these are the standards that apply to the moderate wave action zone, or the MOA, or the coastal A zone. Those are all synonyms. Here, the regulations are a little less restrictive as presently drafted, but in the comment here, oops, sorry, did I advance? No. In the comment here, we are noting that this is still an area where there's the potential for significant impact. You can still have waves with some erosive capacity, and certainly wave heights and flooding that is intensive. So the comment is, and a recommendation is, you could consider applying those same standards applied in the V zone to this MOA or coastal A zone. But a decision point and point of discussion for the community. Also found throughout these regulations are sort of exceptions that are made for historic structures. Our historic structures here are a defining element of Cape Cod that help define our character. There's a lot of there are many that are on the National Register of Historic Places, or they're part of historic districts, and there's good reason for that. However, these are also structures that are vulnerable, and we'd like to help them become as flood resilient as possible. So we'd like them to try, as you apply these regulations, it behooves us all to try to encourage the community to become more resilient. But there may be situations where it makes sense to make some exceptions for historic structures. So this section that addresses this sort of makes that provision for historic structures. Also, something to consider is that if historic structures are addressed in any zoning bylaw that the town has that addresses the floodplain, you want to make sure that there isn't an inconsistency between that zoning bylaw and this regulation. So it's just, that's more of a housekeeping piece there. Yeah.
So in regards to potential protection of historic structures, what if they're not historic, but you have a coastal bank and you have a pre-78 structure? So you're saying, you're recommending no, where the Wetlands Protection Act currently with application may allow for a revetment. So this would be recommending no. Stronger than the state.
Correct. And there are kind of two different things going on there. So
Right.
That's the pre-78 historic. This is National Register defined.
Understood.
Historic.
Yeah, I was more talking, I think the National Register one is pretty clear.
Yeah.
But in terms of, we need to think about, the pre-78 structures too, because we still have some areas that are non-protected, and should they or should they not be, is a question, so.
So with the National Register piece, the most appropriate place to handle that is in the zoning bylaw. It's directly connected to the building code, so that's why we have the reference directly to the floodplain zoning bylaw worked into these regulations. So that's another place where you need to coordinate with other town folks to make sure you're all being consistent. And it's possible that you may decide, keep that in the regulations, even though there isn't anything currently in the zoning bylaw specifically about historic structures, but hopefully by next spring, zoning will be looking at a bylaw that will have that language in it, so you can keep it in there when you adopt it now, so that you don't have to redo it again after the zoning bylaw is updated in a year. So,
And just so the commission knows, that kind of is the plan, is to do regulations sooner rather than later and adopt hopefully a new bylaw, pending the results of those regulations next year.
So then the standards that apply to the MIWA, again, we're moving one zone more landward. This is the area with the least hazard, relatively speaking. Reflecting that, the regulations are less strict again here. And I think you'll see that as you read through them. I'm not sure a lot more needs to be said there. Yeah, and that brings us to the end of what we've presented. So happy to, discuss, take any questions, leave you with your thoughts, whatever, whatever suits you, yeah.
And you've done this follow-up with both Chatham and Orleans at this point?
Just Chatham, and Orleans is scheduled for Tuesday.
Okay. Anything come out of the Chatham discussion that might inform our discussion?
What was Janet's question?
they did have a lot of questions.
Janet had one interesting question. So do you have regulations presently that address land subject to coastal storm flowage?
No.
No, so her question is irrelevant here
Yeah.
then.
Yeah.
So, just one question which applies to current regulations, I think, is that, do I understand correctly that if there's a storm event where the flooding goes beyond the currently defined LCSF, then that becomes the new LCSF or not? But isn't there language somewhere which says either currently defined flood zone or the most recent storm event?
So there is language in the proposed regulations that DEP is putting together that does say that, that would allow it to be a little more expansive in the definition. So if the most recent event went beyond that floodplain, then yes, you could use that.
But that is not currently the case.
I do not believe so, no.
I see.
DEP's been working on draft conditions for a while, and these were done in conjunction with their draft, so it's not very different from their draft. We just don't know when that draft is going to hopefully be put forward, or approved. It's going through review right now, right?
Yeah.
And that could be for a while.
There have been some signals that
Yeah.
DEP is getting ready to promulgate these land subject to coastal storm flowage regulations, that they are closer than they have ever been to promulgating regulations, but it's
You don't
unclear
know,
when.
yeah.
Yeah.
But we could potentially front-run them, and then they could issue something that contradicts what we've done, and we would have to then modify what we've done.
But that would be, I mean, yeah, to be determined. I wouldn't hold that up as a barrier to making progress on this now, because A, we have no guarantee that they are actually going to promulgate regulations. B, as Amy indicated, the attorneys that drafted these worked very closely with DEP staff, so that this proposed language would not be inconsistent with what DEP is considering. That said, these were developed before DEP went through the public comment period, and they may have modified their regulations to reflect that.
For a
So,
little timescale context, they started the process in 1993 and still have not promulgated these regulations. So that's why we're looking.
All
to
right.
I think
that.
that's why there was
Hopefully
a
we
chuckle
don't
at the
take
last
30
meeting
years.
when the same question was asked.
Exactly,
I
right,
remember
exactly,
people were laughing.
exactly.
And your regulations can be stronger than, but not weaker than, the state. So if anything, I don't foresee this being weaker.
This is not gonna be weaker than the state.
And is the goal for all the towns to adopt the same regulations as we workshop through these discussions? Like you would
That is the goal. I mean, that was the aim in developing templates to begin with, but also recognizing that our communities are all very different, both in terms of their shorelines and their floodplains, but also personalities and what they can tolerate. So the regulations that you see with the comments in them are designed to be sort of à la carte. You can work through them and pick and choose to some extent. I think the fact that all of the communities are working to adopt something with a very similar, working from the same document would result in similar structures throughout, which I think would be hugely beneficial as you have consultants and developers come before you with requests for project approvals. You can all point to other towns that, these are similar to what Chatham, Orleans, Nantucket, West Tisbury,
Dennis.
are thinking about Eastham.
And Chatham has actually, in their zoning bylaw, they have prohibited new development in the V zone and new dwellings in the A zone since the early 90s. So Chatham has been doing pieces of this for a very long time. Yeah.
Really?
Yep.
That has been
The
upheld on appeal.
Redevelopment, however, has not been prohibited.
Correct. That is different.
Right.
Right. But a new structure has been, is not allowed, an entirely new, if there was no structure on the parcel before, you can't put a structure on it. You can replace one for one, and square footage unfortunately is not considered in that, but at the foundation, yes, they've prohibited new structures, and that was held up in court.
And where are both towns in their process, how far along, are we all kind of in lockstep here, or?
Very, very similar
Very close,
places,
okay.
yeah. I mean, these Pleasant Bay towns, we didn't elaborate on that, but the SNEP funding was something that town of Chatham applied for initially, and then thought, oh, let's engage our other Pleasant Bay neighbor towns. And so we expanded that project to include, at this point, it's Orleans and Harwich. We're including Brewster, they may or may not engage.
And also, with my volunteer hat on, I'm on the Dennis Conservation Commission, so I'm also kind of trying to keep Dennis in line with what all the Pleasant Bay towns are doing.
And I know the town of Eastham is also very, they were a town partner when we first developed these regulations. So they've been thinking about, talking about adopting these for some time, and it's still active there.
Nantucket as well is actually moving
Yeah.
along too.
So Brewster's 50 feet or whatever it is on Pleasant Bay is not gonna compromise anything?
No, right. Well, and overall, I think maybe Brewster's lack of engagement at this point is they have a very small area in the floodplain overall. Even the Cape Cod Bay shoreline, there's very little in the floodplain. They have the least of any of our Cape Cod towns.
It's 108 structures total, which is not many comparatively.
Compared to us, which I think out of the 4 towns we're talking about, we have the most
Yeah.
structures in the floodplain at 17 or 1800-ish.
I don't remember off the top of my head.
But yeah, it's a
It's
lot.
between 1 and 2,000.
I think 1,800.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was by far the most.
It's a
Yeah.
lot.
So this is designed because when we have several projects that come in front of us for land subject to coastal storm flowage. A lot of people, we've had a large number of people want to come in and add fill lately, and we always get that same argument, oh, it's just a drop in the bucket, and it's the ocean, it's not gonna, but I think I told an engineer the other day, it's like enough drops, maybe it might make a difference, particularly in what flood zone you're in, as to diverting water in places maybe you wouldn't normally see water. So how do we regulate it? And this is designed to better guide you in terms of what you should be looking at when you have a project in a flood zone. I have one suggestion. just because this just came up and I wouldn't have thought of it otherwise. Under 6, presumptions on page 11. You have all of these, under C, you have all these examples of things that could have adverse impacts, right? I would, just because this just happened, add another bullet potentially for removal of material. And not just placement of fill material, but removal of fill.
Yeah.
We had somebody that is currently in violation with us, over on Route 28, who removed 2 feet when they're only at elevation 6 to begin with. But they're gonna put it back. We don't know that, though.
So,
Yep, that's a
Okay,
good point.
interesting point, yeah.
I
yeah.
don't know, it's just,
Yeah,
it's,
yeah.
maybe it's like a one in 1,000
No, I
chance,
could see
but
that happening other places.
There is somewhere else that it's happened,
people
although
are gonna
it's-
carve something out.
So, and one other potential, the one other case where I've seen it happen is, it was an area that had been filled in the past, and then the building commissioner was requiring that the fill be removed 20 years later if they wanted to build there. So that was another one, and in that case, you know, maybe it's actually not a bad thing, but,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
so do we have other comments or questions? Mark?
One consideration. The draft refers to pavement, permeable, unpermeable pavement and so forth. Maybe there should be a consideration or specification for permeable products to generate some guideline, some baseline.
Do you mean defining explicitly what qualifies as permeable?
Some definition, some degree of something.
That'd be helpful.
We've had that conversation here more than once.
Yeah.
It's always been open to interpretation, but from an engineering standpoint, there are definite differences.
Right.
Yeah. That came up actually recently in something we were regulating at the Cape Cod Commission. Engineer observed, you know, permeable pavers, but it's still supported by something that's effectively impervious.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a particular method for it to work properly.
Mhm.
Right. Anything else?
No, other than the obvious, there's a lot of overlap in the building code with things that are mentioned here, and I can't help but wonder if a lot of it isn't better served statewide, spelled out through the building code, so it's more standardized. I look at this and I can't help but think maybe it's a little more intense than it needs to be.
That's certainly one thing that you can consider. We would agree that it would be better statewide, but the likelihood of that happening in the near future is very, very slim.
Well, yeah, that's probably true, but the fact is, if the state has a baseline of regulation, that means everybody's on the same playing field, no matter what town it is for an engineer or a contractor or homeowner, whatever it is. It's a starting point.
Right.
And allow the towns to upgrade it in their specific cases, depending on what their circumstances.
So, agreed. Also, will note that part of the reason that we have this suite of regulations that address both zoning and wetlands is that your purview here, in the Conservation Commission, is somewhat different. And your purpose is really to protect those wetland functions. So the aim of this, even though in the end it's human beings that we're trying to manage and regulate around, the purpose of this is to protect wetlands, whereas the zoning bylaw is regulating how we build our structures. So it's a sort of a fine point, but I think there is a role for both wetlands regulations as well as zoning and building regulations, and they're meant to work together. So just with that in mind, I think your point is well made. You may see things here that you feel are unnecessary in terms of how Harwich regulates things under your zoning bylaws.
And I'll note, also related to the building code and the zoning bylaws, there are some pieces in there that are specifically intended to clarify aspects of the building code, because building commissioners have run into issues over and over the years with those pieces. But that has to be in zoning rather than in conservation.
Yeah, we had, in developing these regulations initially, we tapped building commissioners, planners, and conservation administrators to sort of review and input on the elements, so that we were trying to address those problems that seem to recur.
Wayne?
Is this basically all about the fear of sea level rise? Is that what the bottom line is here? Do we have the science to prove that? That's actually happening? We do?
Absolutely.
We do.
I haven't seen it, but that's just me.
Well, so one of the things that you may want to consider in the future, and how this is developed, is to regulate that future floodplain that is based on our both current observation and projections for future sea level rise. It relies on, the bylaw relies on modeling that the state commissioned, actually the Massachusetts Department of Transportation commissioned this work, so that it was, as it moves forward with replacing, resurfacing roads, replacing culverts, rebuilding bridges, that they're building them in such a way that they are resilient to the future flooding that we know is coming.
That's my question. How do you know this, that it's coming?
There are measurements that demonstrate that we have already
Measurements
seen,
where?
using tide gauges that have been out there for a really long time, and measuring against those tide gauges, then measurements that were taken, I don't know, a century ago or
Yeah.
something, and now, and that there has been a foot of rise over that period of time, but more importantly, that the rate of increase is increasing. So that's about the extent of my knowledge on this topic. There are a lot of resources we can point you to if you want to get into it. But the state's Department of Transportation commissioned this work, which has now been adopted by the state broadly as the best science available, I think is telling. That the state is designing future infrastructure to be resilient to these anticipated flood levels.
So there are at least two models that I know of. The state's model that you're talking about that show estimated sea level rise, and based on assumptions, of course, because nobody knows exactly what's going to happen,
Right.
but they all show sea level rise. The other one is the Center for Coastal Studies, also has a model that's modeling sea level rise all around the Cape. And I think maybe, Amy, if you have these links, you should
Yep.
send them.
I'd be happy to.
Both of those things show sea level rise. There are two things that I'm aware of that are contributing to this. One is referred to as AMOC, which is the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Current, of which the Gulf Stream is the surface part of that. But there's a subsurface part where the current returns, and it's pretty clear to all the scientists following this that the fresh water that is coming off the glaciers in the polar and subpolar regions are changing that and threatening to stop it from happening. And when that slows down and stops, the models show sea level rise on the east coast of North America. There's another thing called the subpolar gyre, which is like the top of that thing, which is a circulating current there, which people are showing may actually slow down and stop before the AMOC. And the result of that would also be substantial sea level rise on the east coast of North America, and would not just impact water levels, but our weather would be a mess. But those things are well understood and have been studied very closely for many years. And maybe we can get someone in here to talk about those things, because I'm just talking about, some 100,000-foot level understanding of this. But those are real things which have been very closely studied for a number of years. And I don't think in the scientific community there's much of any doubt whatsoever that
Right.
this stuff is happening.
There are a few other inputs. Some inputs are, as we see sea surface temperatures increasing as water warms, the molecules expand, they get further apart, and that means that the volume taken up by that liquid increases, so that results in sea level rise. Also, as we have land-based glaciers melting and inputting more water into the oceans, that increases the levels. But even more than that, as the mass of the glaciers shrinks, the oceans are also subjected to gravity, and the bigger masses pull the ocean toward it or let it slosh away as those glaciers shrink in size. So then the ocean kind of sloshes back up toward the East Coast. There are a lot of factors. The state is currently working on a new climate report, and there are several scientists, both from Woods Hole Oceanographic. There's also one from the Gulf of Maine Research Institute and other Massachusetts folks that are on that give a really detailed explanation of all of these different causes of sea level rise. I don't know when that will be released, but when it is, that'll be a good resource.
Thank you.
Sure.
So do we have other questions or?
I have one more clarifying question. Back to your question on the tidal rivers. I'm assuming there's probably some overlap there, that some of the tidal river land might be land subject to coastal.
Yes.
If it's not though, and if there is like tidal surges, it just seems like that should be included in this. Because it seemed like definitely it's not, and that just confused me, I guess.
It is. So it is in terms of the mapping.
Okay.
Yeah.
It seemed to me that's where a lot of our,
Yeah.
we have so many more structures at risk.
Right, yeah.
Yes.
It's, I think what Heather was saying is that it's separate from your riverfront area, which it has different regulations, and there's the 200-foot buffer, and so, and the purpose of that is different than this purpose. But it is, for this purpose and what we're doing here, it is covered by the mapping.
Just to be cheeky, what's holding the state up? I mean, there's a lot of irony here. They're making all these models, but they're not, then everything else is held up. Is it lobbyists?
This is the
it-
question that we
Yes.
keep getting, that we should have remembered when we were asked what was helpful. We don't know,
Yeah, okay.
yeah.
I mean,
You're not wrong.
I think what it's been for these, 30-odd years, 93 to 26, more, yeah, is, property owners, development community, people with property in the floodplain who, don't
Yeah,
want
that's what I
any additional regulation there. There's an amazing movie called Inundation District that is set, it's a documentary set in South Boston in the Seaport District. And, talk about irony.
Yeah, because there you can actually see it firsthand.
You can
monthly.
see, yes. The city of Boston basically put a lot of infrastructure in place to make it possible for the Seaport District to be built into what it is today, which is very lovely and pleasant to walk around until it's a storm, and then it is literally underwater, and that's only gonna get worse.
I have a couple questions about sponsoring organizations. Can you, we hear about Hui Sea Grant all the time, but I don't know what actually Hui Sea Grant is.
Yes,
Sure,
please.
sure. So every coastal state has a Sea Grant program. It is housed under the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And the intention is to take the science, for example, that's coming out of Hui, and translate it into something usable by the end user. So translate the sea level rise science into regulations Or something that I do working with Amy and building commissioners is help them understand what the building code regulations are, or Amy gets something in the floodplain and tries to understand what factors do we have to consider here. So Sea Grant programs have folks like me. We also have folks who focus on erosion. We also have aquaculture and fisheries folks. So especially here, we have a lot of work with our both recreational and commercial, but especially commercial aquaculture industry. So we are housed at Hui in Massachusetts. We actually happen to have 2 Sea Grant programs. MIT also has a Sea Grant program. California is the only other state in the country that has 2 Sea Grant programs, so we're lucky here in Massachusetts. But we get funding, we get federal funding from NOAA to both do research, to fund research that any academic institution can apply for, as long as it's kind of within our umbrella interests. And then we get that information and then make sure that folks understand it, and then we all have our own areas of expertise with existing science and helping the end users, especially communities, understand how to use that information.
Okay, my other question is, what is the New England Environmental Finance Center?
That's for you.
They are an institute or center of the University of Southern Maine, and they ultimately they applied for this SNEP funding to put together the SNEP network. And the SNEP network, so SNEP is the Southern New England Environment Program, something that EPA Region 1 put together to help the the communities on the sort of south coast of Massachusetts and down through Rhode Island help address water quality challenges. So, and it's unfortunate that the terms are similar, but the SNAP network is actually a project of the New England Environmental Finance Center putting together a consortium of groups like the Cape Cod Commission, other regional planning agencies, consultants, nonprofits, this whole group that can provide technical assistance to these coastal communities to help them with water quality challenges, coastal resiliency challenges, things like that. So the SNAP network is now in its second 5-year grant providing this technical assistance to communities, coordinated by NEEFC. I have one more slide, which is just sort of help you focus some of your future conversations on this topic. As we've discussed, you know, you will want to go through these regulations and read the comments. The comments provide some guidance on decision points that you will need to make as you move forward. But other things that you'll want to talk about are specifically the types of allowable development in each of those coastal zones. You know, specifically with the V zone, do you want to prohibit all of those activities that we've identified? You know, we really are recommending that you prohibit in that area. Do you want to apply that to the coastal A zone, or do you want to do something less restrictive in the A zone, et cetera? And then we talked a little bit about substantial improvement and substantial damage. Do you want to use assessed value or market value or an appraised value? You know, and as Amy said, you want to make sure that you are being consistent with sort of approaches here in the town of Harwich. Talk about the inclusion of historic structures, you know, how you might want to treat that. And then the elevation of structures, we didn't get into that a lot about that today. I think given the conversation here today, I would recommend to you that we put off a conversation of elevation of structures to a future date. Sort of talk about the regulations as drafted and see what questions you might have going forward. We are happy to return when you are ready to have us return and talk about next steps. And one other thing that, Susan, to your question about other things that came up in Chatham, we do recommend that at some point you work with your town council about incorporating these regulations and making sure that there aren't any inconsistencies with other regulations here in Harwich.
And one other thing, also remembering things that came up in Chatham, one question that came up was about insurance rates and how this could affect insurance. The town of Harwich participates in what's called the community rating system. Everybody in town gets a 15% discount on flood insurance, and this will go toward increasing that discount. We'll hopefully get to 20% if, especially some of the development limitations in this are adopted. As far as homeowners insurance, there's not as clear of a connection between the two, but anecdotally, I've been told from several parts of the Cape that homeowners insurance companies are looking to have floodplain regulations enforced on houses if they want to keep their insurance. So basically meaning that the houses have to be brought up to flood codes if they want to keep their homeowners insurance, even though homeowners insurance does not cover flooding. Homeowners insurance companies are so concerned about our flood risk here on the Cape that they're really paying attention to what we're doing regarding flooding. So there's also a move to take a more community-wide approach to looking at what the towns are doing with regulations in terms of insurance as well. So presumably, if that sort of approach moves forward, this would also be very helpful in proving that the town is taking flooding seriously and trying to take actions to improve the safety of the community with regard to flooding.
So you're referring, however, only to properties that are in a flood zone. Are you suggesting that homes that aren't in a flood zone would still see some help with insurance if we establish more well-defined and somewhat more strict flood zone regulations?
It's highly hypothetical. It's not currently how the insurance industry works, but there is a push to shift how the insurance industry works, specifically because of how homeowners insurance is working everywhere on the Cape. So the way that they rate our risk, they look at, for example, I live near Route 6. I am very aware of my flood risk. It is extremely low. When I talked to my landlord about insurance and then went beyond that, we discovered that they are considering, because the town of Dennis is at high flood risk, my insurance went up, even though I'm not anywhere near a flood zone. So they consider the entire town, even if you're not near a flood zone. So it is possible that if the insurers decide to look at the whole town and what the town is doing to regulate flood risk, that it could potentially lower it. Right now, there is no direct mechanism to do that. Where there is a direct mechanism to lower flood insurance rates, there's not a direct mechanism to lower homeowners insurance rates. But if things continue moving in the direction that some folks are pushing things in, then it would. But it's certainly not going to increase insurance rates.
Okay,
Interesting question.
Yeah.
so thank you. I think we've exhausted. Is there anyone else in the room who wants to? We're all here sort of supporting, right? Okay. Anything else, Amy?
I would just say thank you for the outline to kind of have talking points for next steps for the commission. Something for you, like to put something on the agenda in terms of at one of our, next agendas in the next month or so, to talk about this. So if you want to digest it, and I'll send some more information around for people, but kind of focus on this slide presentation you have. So this is the last slide. So start thinking about these things. And I'll certainly talk with Eleanor, our building commissioner. We already have talked a lot about this type of stuff. But I'll be prepared to share with you, her thoughts as building commissioner when we decide to talk about this further.
So let's talk about timelines a little bit.
Yeah.
So your goals I don't think you really said it here, but I think you said it at one of the previous meetings, are for like 2027 town meetings, you'd like to see towns adopting zoning, new zoning bylaws or modifications to zoning bylaws, and you're looking for the suggested changes to our wetlands bylaws to front-run that. So in your ideal time frame, when would we be like having a hearing about, for the town, about proposed changes to our wetlands regulations?
I would fully put this on you, you know, I don't have any ideal. However, we currently have funding through the end of September to support towns in this effort, to help you with adopting regulations. That funding aside, this is work that Shannon and I are both committed to, and so we're here to help communities sort through these questions and come up with regulations that make sense. To your sort of more specific timeline, at the workshop, what we outlined was that towns, the Pleasant Bay towns, start with adopting these regulations within this calendar year, 2026. While you're doing that, we would work with your communities to draft zoning bylaws, if that was something that was of interest, as well as wetlands bylaws that would allow you to expand your jurisdiction. And that those bylaws would potentially go on to the 2027 Springtown meetings.
Okay, thank you.
I think if you, so that you don't lose momentum,
Mhm.
the sooner you can work on it, the better. And we can help you walk through each piece of this and make sure you understand what it's actually saying. And so that you're not working on both regulations and a different bylaw at the same
Mhm.
time. Maybe front load the regulations, maybe aim for summer to adopt the regulations, but as Heather says, it's up to you all how you want to approach that, but.
Well, and just invite Carol.
Because I think the timeline question came up.
Can you come up to the mic, Carol?
Just
Come
at
Or the podium is
or
fine.
whatever.
Come and sit.
Sorry, otherwise
Just
the
a very
tape
brief
won't
comment, but
get you.
the timeline came up in Chatham, and they were thinking along the lines just discussed. Working toward spring, summer adoption of regulations and targeting 2027 annual town meeting for both the zoning and the wetlands bylaw changes. And I think for you to consider, and as stated, it's each community's prerogative, but we're hoping that there's some benefit to having the towns moving sort of in contemporaneously, that there's some momentum that builds, recognizing that this is, kind of regionally identified as an effort and important, and learning from each other as communities have the conversations. We're also, certainly at the early stages of these outreach meetings, but going to be developing more informational materials that might be useful in the communities as well. I mean, just listing all the questions we're hearing in these meetings is a good starting point for what we're likely to hear in the community and beyond. So anyway, just a little additional context on the timing consideration.
Mr. Chair, if I may. In terms of, I like the idea of summer, just because we have, I know summer's crazy busy, but you're gonna capture people who are here, who are not gonna be here in the off-season. So, but when we have public information sessions, it would be, I would think, best to have it in the summertime. We could have hybrid meetings so people can attend virtually as well. But I think you can then say, you did it during the time of year that most of the residents are here. So if we could have this within the next 2 to 3 months, I think, and maybe have something ready for the commission to get behind at the end of that time frame to be able to talk about it in the summer, and then maybe a fall. Yeah. Anyway, summer.
So we need to think about our schedule
Correct.
in that context.
Well,
I
do
ju-
we wanna continue for a little bit longer, just us with chat?
We can, and they can stay, or whatever you want to do.
Or we
So-
can stay or we can go.
Well, yeah,
If you're
either
more
one.
comfortable, then let's go.
But can I just, on a sort of, on a different point, maybe an annoying point, is, there is a lot of skepticism about things like sea level rise. And if recent events on other issues are any guide, there can be a lot of flack, let's just call it flack, put up in social media, which can garner a ton of attention and turn the tide sometimes against reason. And I'm just wondering if you guys have plans, starting now, to counter that, because it's like, there's a PR thing that needs to be done here. What are your plans for that? How are you gonna, do you have plans for countering the inevitable storm that comes claiming that there is no such thing as global warming, there is no such thing as sea level rise, it's junk science or whatever? You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, great point. I'd say it's a group effort here. This is something that you as a town are taking on, and so you're gonna need to manage some of that at the local level. And I think Cape Cod, just speaking for Cape Cod Commission, I think we're going to be, we're not going to want to address community issues on behalf of the community. However, we are here to provide facts, and we have a lot of materials that we can share that would help address these questions. And I think you make a good point, and I'll take that back, and we'll be maybe prepared with something that is more easily distributed along these lines. At the same time, the Pleasant Bay Alliance is here to support this work as well. We have talked about having additional outreach events that would help educate the community about what this effort is about and to get the facts out there, some of which include the level of risk here in the town of Harwich. We can generate some figures for you, specifically how many homes are currently in the floodplain and at risk, how many are in the V zone versus the A zone, the value of those properties. We've also had an economic analysis done that helps us all understand, and it's broken down town by town, about the cost of doing nothing. Like, if we don't change our actions with regard to the changing climate, what kinds of costs are we looking at? What is, anticipated costs from a disaster event? So we are planning on putting some of those figures together. So in advance of any votes that you might take as a commission, and certainly in advance of any town meeting actions, we're prepared to provide some data and figures to help you make those arguments. We also, Amy, if you could share with this group also on our, maybe we can share with you, maybe, and then you can distribute to them.
Sure.
We have a communications toolkit that was developed to help communities talk about these issues. That was part of the first project that developed these regulations. And the toolkit helps define terms, explains some of the science, and helps put language together for having these kinds of conversations with communities. So I think that would be useful as well.
We've also put together a page on the Pleasant Bay Alliance website that is going to be sort of where we're going to link all of these PowerPoint presentations, the draft regulations, some of the tools, the viewing tools, the climate viewing tools that we talked about, We'll have links to these meetings, so if you want to listen to the Chatham conversation, just to hear what their conversation's about, that will be there. So we're gonna, and the toolkit's there as well.
Oh, good.
So we're gonna,
That's great.
continue to populate that page, so there is a sort of a one place you can go to keep abreast of how the conversation's going in one's community, and also the other two communities in Pleasant Bay that are working on this presently.
I also want to clarify that the regulations, there are pieces of them that are driven by sea level rise, but a lot of just the regulations are actually not, because it's the bylaw that has to expand that jurisdiction to consider sea level rise. So you currently have no regulations for your floodplains, even though your floodplains are an extremely high-risk area. So it's just that you're putting these regulations into place for an existing high-hazard area, regardless of sea level rise. Sea level rise makes it more important to do this, but you still have flood risk, and the whole Cape has been very lucky that we have not been hit by a major storm terribly recently, but we will be. And that's what we're protecting against. We're protecting against those lower probability but very high consequence events that can happen regardless of sea level rise. So it's also just the probability of flooding that we're using these regulations to protect against.
I mean, it doesn't even have to be these catastrophic events. Just 2 winters ago, we had a storm that came straight up out of the south and pushed several feet in addition to the high tide up. And yes, it's tidal, so it went back out, but people were isolated for a couple of hours. There was 3 feet of water in the road over at, Smith Street and North Road. And people who've, never had water in their basements, had water in their basements, so.
Exactly.
Okay, well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And sure we'll be seeing you again soon.
Thank you.
We will be back, yes.
So do we want to discuss schedule? I'm not sure what you were thinking, Susan.
Well, we
when-
just wasted another 10, so maybe not.
I was
Wasted.
gonna say, if there were any
Is that
initial,
waste? I'm
and if it's
sorry.
help, I don't, if there are any initial thoughts on some of this, like I said, I'm gonna talk to the building commissioner. Yeah,
Initial thoughts on how I would decide? Yeah, I would say no new on V, but that's,
You would say what?
no new on V. Have a nice ring to it, doesn't it?
well, the
No
building,
new development on,
Oh,
the,
in the velocity zone.
yeah.
yeah. I think building code already restricts that for new on an undeveloped parcel, so that's an easy-ish one, yeah.
I
You
think,
can redevelop, you just can't rebuild, or you can't, build new
Still no, right.
in the velocity zone.
Very curious to see the information on how much land is available to develop in those zones.
Yep.
The reason I
Sure.
say that is there's gonna be some pushback if you've got property owners.
Understood.
And all of a sudden you say, no, you can't build on it. We saw that in Harwich Port about 2 years ago, and that was kind of an expensive outcome for the town.
Right. To elaborate on the top one here, on that first bullet, so just know that, coastal A is different than the regular A zone. That coastal A is because it's the 1.5 to 3 feet waves, versus the 0 to 1.5 foot waves, because as we know, a 3 foot wave is gonna cause a lot more damage than just a little 1.5 foot wave. So you could break that up as they did here.
so the,
And Chatham went, way above and just said nothing, no new development on undeveloped parcels in the entire A zone. That may not be the way the Harwich wants to go.
Oh, the entire A, including the left?
I heard,
Yeah,
that's what, she said,
She
the
was
A
talking
zone.
about that, yeah, aligning both of them,
So
the
are
B
there-
zone and the A zone.
Yeah,
Making the
Go
same
ahead.
regulation.
do we have maps? I mean, the maps on Mass Mapper don't distinguish between coastal A and A, right?
they do. But I can get it clearer, it's not very good. No, not coastal A, I apologize. FEMA does. I'll send you the FEMA Map Service Center, but also the Cape Cod Commission has very good maps that I'll send you that differentiate, and I can ask them. I know that they know how many structures are in each zone, but I can ask them to see if they can pull how many parcels in those zones are left for development.
So the language that they're proposing here is very extensive,
Mm-hmm.
and it would be a big addition to our wetlands regulations.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you envision it would go in there? Is there a section now just defined but blank for?
It would be extensive. So essentially, the bylaw that would hopefully eventually take this would be a snippet of it, basically an overview, and this would really go, the regulations are meant to get into the nitty-gritty of stuff that a bylaw just kind of mentions. So, again, you can decide what or how much of this you want to include. But in my mind, this would be a whole new section of the regs.
Under,
So in the regs, there's different chapters.
yeah,
This would be a different chapter,
New chapter.
a new chapter.
So, a suggestion for how we might proceed
Mm-hmm.
is chunk this whole set of new language up into, I don't know, maybe 3 different sections,
Mm-hmm.
and schedule meetings to take on one
Piece by
section, one piece at a time,
That's fine.
and go through in detail,
Mm-hmm.
so that we don't attempt to, like, talk about the whole thing all at once.
Sure.
Like,
That's a good idea, John.
Yeah.
And just so I understand, when you had answered the question, like we refer to land subjected to coastal,
Storm flowed, so.
we don't have regulations for that specific thing you said?
We define it basically as the FEMA flood zone, the regulatory flood zones. We don't have performance standards for it. And that's not unusual. Most towns don't.
Would these become performance standards under that?
These would become,
Then within the regulations?
yes,
Okay.
yep. So these would become, yeah, the regulation, what people have to meet or burdens they have to overcome in order to build.
So, do you want to schedule, I mean, I don't know.
We can do the first go, the first section, on April 1st, if you want. It's hard, because we don't really know what agendas are gonna look like yet for April, because the filing deadlines are not, so, like, the filing deadline for this next week's meeting
is,
was like not a week and a half ago, so we don't know in advance what we're getting, for April yet. We don't know what we're getting for April yet.
Should we add a piece of today's
Yes,
conversation?
I'd say we do a piece on each time,
Yeah,
and so we'll start April 1st.
Oh, we can start at the 18th?
We just posted the agenda,
Oh,
it's done.
Friday.
And we have a few other discussion topics that may take up some time on the 18th, so. Yeah, I think if we plug away, and I'll try to, between now and the 1st, have some information from our building commissioner for you.
so our next sort of item to ponder, if you will, is types of allowable development in each coastal zone. If I'm understanding John correctly, we're gonna chunk it into those conversations, or are you talking about breaking the actual document itself into 3 parts?
well, in
Whichever
3,
you
I
want.
just chose that out of thin air, but, maybe, I mean, if we make it too many little pieces, we'll be at it.
Forever? You like the
I
I
department?
mean, some could be very simple,
I mean,
such as
it's
like
the definitions,
the
you know.
preamble, the purpose, the regulations. I mean, maybe that's a good place to start.
Yeah.
Okay.
yeah,
Preamble,
or-
purpose, preamble, purpose, and definitions. So let's do, and that'll set the stage for the rest.
That's a good idea.
But I think we have to be on the same, we have to be on a similar page with those before we go farther. Okay. Well, thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And in the meantime, whatever more information I get, I'll pass along. And we'll see you next week. Oh, I guess you have to adjourn the meeting now.
Oh, can we have a motion?
I'll make a motion, we adjourn the meeting of, is this considered a meeting? I
It's a
mean,
work
nothing-
session.
A work session of the
Second.
Howard Conservation Commission on Friday, March 13th, 2026.
Motion moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye, aye.